The conference room was filled with quiet chatter as Jane glanced at her phone. The screen lit up with a call from Tom, her husband. She stepped into the hallway, expecting his usual warm voice. "Hey love, how's the trip?" Or "When will you be home?" But instead, what she heard froze her blood. "I'm divorcing you," Tom said, his tone sharp and proud. "I've already sold the apartment, so you'll need to figure out where to live." Jane stood still, her fingers tightening around the phone. The words hit like ice, cold, cruel, and final. "You sold the apartment?" she asked, forcing her voice to stay calm. "Yeah," he replied with a dry laugh. "Me and Nina need the money. She deserves better than that tiny place." Jane's heart sank. The name, Nina, was the knife she had been waiting to feel. She had suspected it for months, the late nights, the sudden trips, the distance that grew between them. But hearing it confirmed, hearing him say her name like she belonged there, it cut deep. Still Jane refused to break. "Sounds good," she said evenly. "Enjoy your new life." She ended the call before her voice could shake. Her name was Jane Carter, 37 years old, a marketing executive who believed in loyalty, hard work, and love. Until that call, she thought she had married a man she could trust. She and Tom had built their life from scratch, a cozy 2-bedroom apartment that wasn't just a home, but a dream they'd achieved together. Now, standing in that hallway, Jane realized everything she'd believed in had been a lie. The apartment symbolized teamwork, faith, and a shared future. But to Tom, it had only been property, something he could trade away for comfort and ego. Looking back, she could see the signs she had ignored. The times Tom brushed off her questions about money with a smile and a kiss. The moments he acted like she didn't need to understand the bills or the refinancing paperwork. She had mistaken arrogance for confidence, charm for care. "He always knew how to make me feel like I didn't need to worry," she whispered to herself. Now she saw the truth. He wasn't confident. He was careless. And that carelessness was about to destroy him. Because what Tom didn't know was that the apartment deed had been in her name for months. When she returned to her hotel that evening, Jane's shock had already turned to determination. She refused to cry. Tom wanted to hurt her, but she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she dialed Chloe, her longtime friend and lawyer. "He sold the apartment," Jane said flatly. "Without asking me." Chloe's sharp intake of breath came through the line. "Wait, does he even realize he can't do that without your consent?" Jane smiled faintly. "Apparently not. He thinks he's already spent the money on his new life." Chloe's tone hardened. "Then he's in for a rude awakening. The sale is illegal, and we'll make sure he pays for it." That night, Jane couldn't sleep. The city lights glowed outside her hotel window, but her mind was restless. Every word Tom said replayed in her head like a cruel echo. "I've already sold the apartment." She almost laughed at the stupidity of it. "He really thought I'd be helpless," she murmured. But instead of drowning in anger, she reached for her laptop and began gathering every document related to the property. Deed, refinance forms, mortgage receipts, all proof that the apartment legally belonged to her. For the first time since the call, she smiled. The battle had already begun. The next morning, Jane met Chloe at a small cafe near her hotel. Chloe was calm but firm, the kind of lawyer who never wasted words. "We'll start by contacting the buyer," she said, sliding her glasses onto her nose. "Once they know Tom doesn't own the property, the sale collapses." Jane sipped her coffee, steadying her nerves. "Do you think he knows he's in trouble?" Chloe smirked. "Not yet. But when the buyer threatens to sue him for fraud, he'll get the message." Jane nodded, her voice low but certain. "Good. I want him to feel what it's like to lose everything he thought he controlled." 2 days later, Jane flew back home. The flight felt endless, but she spent every minute thinking through her next moves. By the time she landed, her fear had turned into calm confidence. The moment she stepped off the plane, she called Chloe. "I'm back," she said, pulling her suitcase from the carousel. "What's next?" Chloe's voice came through strong. We've already spoken to the buyer. They're furious with Tom and ready to cooperate. I've also sent him a legal notice explaining his actions, including the word fraud in bold letters. Jane smiled. Perfect. Let him stew in his own mess for a while. When Jane arrived at the apartment, everything looked the same but felt completely different. Tom's shoes still sat by the door. His jacket hung carelessly over the chair. But the warmth was gone, replaced by a strange emptiness. She set her suitcase down and took a deep breath. "This is mine," she whispered. As if on cue, the door slammed open. Tom stormed in, his phone clutched in his hand, fury all over his face. "What the hell is this, Jane?" he shouted. "You're telling me I can't sell the apartment? It's half mine." Jane crossed her arms, unshaken. "No, Tom. It's not. The deed's been in my name for months." Tom froze, confusion flashing in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. Jane walked to the cabinet, pulled out a folder and held up the deed. "You remember when we refinanced? You signed the transfer papers yourself. You never read them, did you?" He stared at the document, his expression twisting from disbelief to anger. "You think you're clever," he sneered. "But this won't change anything. I already made a deal." Jane's voice was calm but cold. "The deal's void, Tom. The buyer knows it, and they're ready to take you to court. If you've touched a cent of that deposit, you'll answer for it." Tom's face shifted from anger to disbelief. He paced the living room like a caged animal, muttering under his breath. "This is ridiculous. You can't just take everything from me." Jane watched him quietly, her arms folded. "I'm not taking anything from you, Tom. I'm just taking back what's mine." He stopped and glared at her, his voice trembling with frustration. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Jane took a step closer. "You tried to sell my home behind my back. That's not a mistake, that's betrayal." Her calmness only seemed to enrage him more, and he slammed his fist against the table. "You can't kick me out," Tom barked. "You need me to pay the bills." Jane almost laughed. "Pay the bills? You haven't handled a single payment in months. I've covered everything while you spent your time pretending to be the boss." He looked stunned, his lips parting but no words coming out. "Face it, Tom," she said softly. "The only thing you managed was your ego." His jaw tightened and he turned away, trying to hide his embarrassment. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Jane's voice remained steady. "No, Tom. The only thing I regret is not seeing who you really were sooner." 4 days after their confrontation, Tom's pride kept him from leaving. He stomped around the apartment, making calls, sending emails, trying to fix the mess he'd created. Jane ignored him completely, focusing on work and her meetings with Chloe. Every evening Chloe updated her. "The buyer has officially withdrawn," she said one night. "They're threatening legal action against Tom for wasting their time." Jane smiled faintly. "Let them. Maybe this time he'll learn actions have consequences." She hung up, looked around her apartment and felt a new kind of peace. The peace that comes when you stop fearing someone who used to control you. One evening, Tom approached her while she was reading on the couch. "Jane," he started, his tone softer now, almost pleading. "Can't we talk about this?" She didn't look up. "There's nothing left to talk about." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We've been together 6 years. You can't just throw that away." Jane closed her book and met his eyes. "You threw it away the moment you called me to announce our divorce like a business deal." His mouth opened to argue, but the look in her eyes silenced him. "You made your choice, Tom. Now live with it." That night, Jane boxed up his things. His shirts, his watches, even the ugly coffee mug he always left on the counter. Each item went into a cardboard box labeled with quiet finality. When morning came, she pushed the boxes into a corner and called Chloe. "I want the divorce papers ready," she said. Chloe didn't hesitate. "Already on it. He's out of legal options, Jane. You hold every card now." Jane looked around her apartment, feeling both exhausted and proud. "Good," she said softly. "It's time to end this the right way." The next day, Tom came home to find the boxes neatly stacked near the door. "What's this supposed to mean?" he asked. Jane didn't even look up from her laptop. "It means you should start packing. You'll need a new place." His nostrils flared. "You can't just decide that." She turned her chair to face him. "Tom, this apartment is legally mine. You sold what you didn't own. You should be thankful I'm not pressing charges." He stared at her in silence, and for the first time, his anger looked like fear. "You wouldn't," he whispered. "Try me," she said coolly, turning back to her screen. That afternoon, Jane's best friend Laura stopped by. "You sure you're okay?" she asked, setting down a bag of groceries. Jane smiled tiredly. "I'm fine, really. Just cleaning up the past." Laura nodded, unpacking vegetables into the fridge. "I still can't believe he tried to sell your place. That's next-level foolish." Jane laughed softly. "That's Tom. Always assuming he's the smartest one in the room." Laura grinned. "Well, not anymore." They shared a quiet moment before Jane's smile faded. "You know what's funny? I spent years walking on eggshells for him. Now he's the one afraid to breathe too loudly." Tom's behavior grew more desperate with each passing day. One night, he left a voicemail that switched between rage and begging. "You're ruining my life, Jane. Please, we can fix this." She listened once, then deleted it. Chloe called shortly after. "He's been sending me emails too," she said dryly. "Threats, apologies, everything in between." Jane sighed. "He doesn't realize it's over. He still thinks I'll back down." "Then he doesn't know you anymore," Chloe replied firmly. "Keep your head up. You've already won." Jane smiled faintly. "I know. I just can't wait for it to be official." The following weekend, Jane hosted Laura again. Together, they rearranged the furniture, moving Tom's heavy recliner out and replacing it with soft, clean decor. "It feels different already," Laura said, admiring the open space. "Lighter." Jane nodded. "It's like the air's clearer without his chaos." They laughed, sipping tea as sunlight streamed through the windows. "Do you think he'll sign the papers soon?" Laura asked. "He will," Jane replied. "He doesn't have a choice. Chloe's handling everything." There was calm confidence in her tone now, the kind of strength that comes only after surviving betrayal. Later that evening, Tom appeared again, knocking softly for the first time in years. Jane opened the door halfway. "What do you want?" she asked. He looked tired, his eyes red. "I just want to talk," he said quietly. "Please." Against her better judgment, she let him in. "Make it quick." He sat on the edge of the couch, hands trembling. "I messed up," he whispered. "I shouldn't have done what I did." Jane stood by the window, arms folded. "You're right," she said calmly. "You shouldn't have. But sorry doesn't fix what you broke, Tom." His shoulders slumped as silence filled the room. Tom rubbed his face, his voice trembling. "Can't we just start over, Jane? We can sell this place together, split the money, and move on." She shook her head slowly. "You still don't get it, do you? This was never about money. You betrayed my trust, tried to erase me from my own life. There's no starting over from that." He looked at her, eyes wide, realizing that the woman standing before him was no longer the one he could manipulate. "You've changed," he murmured. Jane nodded. "No, Tom. I finally became who I should have been all along." As Tom left that night, Jane felt an unexpected wave of calm wash over her. She closed the door behind him, locking it gently, a small but powerful act of closure. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was peaceful. She poured herself a glass of water, sat on the couch, and stared at the dim city lights. For the first time in years, her thoughts weren't clouded by guilt or confusion. They were clear. Tom had been her past, but he would never touch her future again. The next morning, Chloe called with firm news. "He's agreed to sign the divorce papers," she said. "No fight, no appeal, no drama. I think he finally realizes it's over." Jane smiled, relief flooding her chest. "Thank you, Chloe. For everything." "You don't owe me thanks," Chloe replied warmly. "You just needed someone to remind you what you're capable of." Jane hung up and looked around her apartment. The clean counters, the new furniture, the sunlight spilling through the curtains. Everything felt brighter, freer. This was her home again, and no one could take that away. A week later, Jane met Laura for lunch at a rooftop cafe overlooking the skyline. "You look different," Laura said, smiling. "Lighter. Happier." Jane laughed softly. "I am. I finally stopped trying to fix something that was never mine to fix." Laura raised her glass. "To new beginnings." Jane clinked hers against it. "And to peace. The kind that doesn't depend on anyone else." They both smiled, watching the city move below them. For years, Jane had lived reacting to someone else's decisions. Now every step she took was her own. Later that evening, Jane walked through the apartment, pausing at the small stack of Tom's forgotten things. A photo, a few old books, and his favorite watch. For a long moment, she stared at them, then picked them up and placed them carefully into a box. She wasn't angry anymore, she was done. She left the box outside the door with a note that simply said, "Goodbye and good luck." Then she turned the lock, not just on the door, but on that chapter of her life. Over the next few weeks, Jane poured her energy into work and self-care. Her colleagues noticed the difference. The calm confidence in her tone, the quiet focus in her eyes. "You seem unstoppable lately," one of them said during a meeting. Jane smiled. "Maybe I just stopped letting fear lead the way." Each morning she woke up, brewed her coffee, and stood by the window watching the sunrise. The apartment, once filled with arguments and tension, had become her sanctuary. Every room now carried her peace, not his chaos. One afternoon, she received a letter from Chloe. Inside were the finalized divorce papers, signed and sealed. Jane sat at her kitchen table, reading the official words slowly. Divorce granted. Just 2 words, but they carried the weight of everything she had survived. She exhaled, tears filling her eyes, not from sadness but from relief. She picked up her pen and signed her name one last time beneath the date. It was done. She whispered softly, "I'm free." That weekend, Laura came over with pizza and wine to celebrate. "To freedom." Laura cheered, raising her glass. Jane laughed, clinking hers. "To lessons learned," she added. They ate, talked, and laughed late into the night. "So what's next?" Laura asked, leaning back. Jane smiled thoughtfully. "Maybe a short vacation. Somewhere peaceful. Somewhere that feels like me again." Laura grinned. "You deserve that." Jane nodded. "Yeah, I really do." For the first time in years, she believed it. A month later, Jane stood on the balcony of a seaside cottage, watching the waves crash gently against the shore. The air was cool, the sky painted in soft pink and gold. She took a deep breath, letting the salty wind wash over her face. Her phone buzzed with a message from Chloe. "Just checking in. Hope you're enjoying the peace." Jane smiled and replied, "More than ever." She turned off her phone and closed her eyes. The only sound was the sea, and it felt like music to her soul. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jane whispered to herself, "He thought he took everything from me, but he only freed me." Her lips curved into a soft smile. She had lost a marriage but gained herself, her voice, her courage, her peace. The apartment that once felt like a prison had become the foundation of her strength. And now, as the waves sparkled under the fading light, Jane knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of a new one, written entirely on her own terms.